In 1984, a priest and his 6-year-old daughter vanished without a trace during a vibrant parish festival in Laramie, Wyoming. For nearly 3 decades, the case remained frozen in silence, until the morning a group of construction workers, digging behind the crumbling ruins of St. Agnes Church, struck something solid. Beneath layers of dirt and stone, they uncovered a deep, narrow pit, and inside it, several black plastic bags. Heavy, sealed, human-shaped. Now, standing on the edge of that gaping hole, retired detective Daniel Sloane watches in stunned silence as investigators pull the first bag into the light, revealing not only decayed remains, but a decades-old crucifix clutched in bone. A crucifix engraved with a name he never forgot. To Tom, Love, A. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The initials weren't just familiar. They were burned into the margins of the original case file. Alice Withrow, choir director, confidant, missing 3 weeks after the Aldens. Everyone had whispered, but no one had dared say it out loud. Until now, her presence had been spectral, unprovable. Not anymore. The recovery team moved with practiced solemnity, lifting another bag from the earth with slow, coordinated effort. The plastic creaked and sagged under the weight. Daniel stepped closer, the soles of his boots crunching against gravel and shattered brick. "Stop there," said Officer Beck, motioning with his hand. "Scene's still active." Daniel nodded, but he didn't move back. His eyes stayed fixed on the second bag. It was smaller, tighter, the size of a child. The pit swallowed sound. Even the wind seemed to still, as if the ground itself was listening. "Detective Sloane," called Megan Cruz, the lead forensic tech. She emerged from behind a cordon of yellow tape, her gloves streaked with dirt. "We've recovered a total of 3 bags. 2 contain human remains. The third—" She hesitated. He turned to her, waiting. "The third contained objects, personal items." She handed him a sealed evidence pouch. Inside, a rosary, a child's storybook warped with moisture, and a photograph. Daniel took the pouch, with trembling hands. The photo was faded and cracked, but the image was unmistakable. Father Alden, smiling in front of the church, kneeling beside him, little Rose, holding a red balloon. The very balloon she was last seen chasing that night. The corners of Daniel's mind began to close in on themselves, drawing together years of dead ends, fruitless leads, and silent prayers. This wasn't just evidence. This was the edge of something buried long and deep, a secret someone had tried very hard to erase. He looked back toward the old church, St. Agnes. Once the heart of this town. Now it was a hollowed carcass, boarded, windows, splintered pews, walls flaking with mildew and time. The townsfolk had stopped coming years ago, some out of grief, others out of guilt, and yet it still stood, as if waiting. Daniel's memories pulled him back, 27 years ago, to that night. The way the lights of the festival lit the lawn, the smell of popcorn and incense, the sound of laughter layered over church bells, then the sharp report of a scream, so quick it was nearly drowned in the noise. He had been a junior officer then, ambitious, devoted, and utterly unprepared for what he would find, or what he wouldn't. No struggle, no blood, no goodbye, just vanishing. Daniel turned back to Megan. "I want everything bagged, cataloged, photographed, and under triple chain of custody protocols." She nodded. "Already started. And the IDs?" he asked quietly. "We'll know by tomorrow," she said. "But based on the bone structure, we're pretty sure it's them." Daniel exhaled slowly. The air burned his lungs. A young officer approached, nervous, barely out of the academy. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." Daniel frowned. "Who?" "Says she used to live here, knew the family, claims she has information." Daniel's pulse ticked faster. "Name?" The officer checked his notebook. Elaine Kessler. Daniel froze. Elaine Kessler had been the parish secretary. She'd vanished from the town 6 months after the disappearances, claimed she was moving to help family. She was never interviewed, never followed up. She's waiting outside the fence, the officer added. Daniel handed the evidence pouch back to Megan and walked briskly toward the perimeter, the late afternoon light now leaning into dusk. He passed the cordon trucks, stepped through the rusted gate and saw her, Elaine, older now, early 70s, but unmistakable. She stood in a tan coat, holding a handbag tightly to her chest, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. "Elaine," Daniel said, stopping in front of her. "Why are you here?" Her voice trembled. "Because I knew this day would come, and I couldn't carry it anymore." He stared at her. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, but resolute. "There are things you never knew, Detective. Things no one dared say. Not back then, not in a town like this." She glanced past him, toward the open pit. "I know who buried them," she whispered. The last time Elaine Kessler had spoken to Daniel Sloane, it was over a plate of cold lemon. Bars in the church rectory kitchen. She had been 60 then, still spry, still sharp, still hiding everything that mattered. Now, nearly 3 decades later, she stood before him like a ghost made flesh. Older, grayer, but heavy with something she was finally ready to let go. They sat inside a small mobile command unit parked just outside the excavation site. The interior was cramped and quiet, humming softly with the low buzz of equipment and muffled radio chatter. Daniel sat opposite her, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hands. Elaine didn't touch hers. "I should have come forward," she said, voice hoarse. "Back then. But I was afraid." "Afraid of who?" Daniel asked. Elaine looked at him, her eyes tired. "Not who. What?" Daniel frowned. "Start from the beginning." She took a shaky breath. "It was never just about Father Alden, or the girl. It was about what they found." Daniel's fingers stiffened around the coffee cup. "What do you mean, found?" Elaine leaned in, her voice dropping. "There's something buried beneath that church, something older than any of us. Before St. Agnes was even built, that ground, it was already claimed." Daniel's face hardened. "Claimed by who?" Elaine gave a sad, haunted smile. "Not who. What?" Daniel stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if she was losing her grip, or if she had held on to something too dark for too long. Elaine continued. "Father Alden came to me one night, weeks before the festival. He was shaken. He'd found something during a renovation in the sub-basement. Something he wouldn't describe in detail, only that it wasn't right. He kept saying, 'This isn't God's ground anymore.'" Daniel's stomach turned. "And the little girl?" he asked quietly. "She started having nightmares," Elaine whispered. "Said she heard voices under the floor. Said someone was knocking from the ground." Daniel's heart began to pound. That detail had never been in any report. Elaine looked down at her lap, her hands trembling. "The day before they disappeared, he asked me to hold something for him. Said if anything happened, I should give it to the authorities." She opened her bag and carefully pulled out a small velvet pouch. Daniel took it cautiously. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a gold signet ring, intricately carved. The symbol in the center was unlike anything he recognized, sharp, angular, almost geometric, like something ancient and precise. Around the edges, Latin, faded but legible. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. Elaine shook her head. "I never dared to find out." Daniel stared at it. He'd seen countless pieces of evidence in his life. Guns, bloodied knives, letters, journals, but never something that made his skin crawl just by holding it. There was something wrong with this ring. He set it on the table, gently, and looked back at Elaine. "Why now?" he asked. "Why bring this after so many years?" She gave a long, shaky exhale. Because someone came to my door last week. A man I didn't recognize. Said it was time for the truth to be known. Said the earth was done keeping secrets. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What did he look like? Tall, thin, gray hair, wore a long coat even in the heat. Spoke with a voice that felt wrong, like it echoed. Daniel stood suddenly, heart racing. Elaine flinched. Detective? I've seen him, Daniel said, his voice low. Or someone like him. Elaine looked pale. He's not from here, is he? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the evidence board on the wall, clipped the ring's photo to the top, and drew a line beneath it. Then he reached for his phone. Who are you calling? Elaine asked. Someone who used to work in religious antiquities at the university, Daniel said. If that symbol means anything, they'll know. Elaine gripped her hands together, her voice barely a whisper. Detective, do you believe in evil? Daniel didn't respond right away. He looked out the window toward the collapsing steeple of St. Agnes and thought about the photograph of Rose with her balloon, about the crucifix, the whispers in the sub-basement, the ring, the missing, and the deep, impossible silence that had swallowed them all. He turned back to Elaine. I believe, he said, that something was buried here, and now it wants to be found. The university building stood quiet in the blue-gray of early morning, nestled against the base of the hills like it was hiding from time. Daniel hadn't stepped foot on campus in over a decade, but as he parked beneath the shadow of the old library, he saw the familiar name carved into the sandstone archway. Institute for Religious and Cultural Studies. He carried the ring in an evidence bag, tucked into his coat pocket. The hallway smelled of old paper and varnish, every step echoing, beneath fluorescent lights that hummed like distant wasps. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar. Dr. Harriet Malkin, Religious Antiquities. He knocked lightly and stepped in. The office was a maze of books, parchment scrolls, crucifixes, and clay replicas of Mesopotamian tablets. In the middle of it all, like the eye of a scholarly hurricane, sat Harriet, mid-60s, wiry silver hair, tortoise-shell glasses sliding down her nose. She looked up from a microfiche reader, then did a double-take. Daniel Sloane? She said, incredulous. God, last time I saw you, you were threatening to arrest the dean for parking violations. He gave her a tired smile. I needed help. He parked in front of a hydrant during a fire drill. She gestured him in with a dramatic sweep. What brings a burned-out detective to my dusty corner of the world? Daniel pulled the evidence bag from his coat and handed it to her. Her smile vanished. Harriet lifted the bag gently, squinting at the ring through the plastic. Then she turned to her desk lamp, switched to a magnifying lens, and held the ring beneath it. Seconds passed. Then a full minute. Finally, she looked up, her voice lower now. Where did you get this? Buried under a church, Daniel said, near two bodies. Harriet blinked slowly. It's not just religious. This is pre-religious. He frowned. What does that mean? She removed her glasses. The symbol in the center isn't Christian. It predates Christianity by centuries. Maybe millennia. I've only seen something like it once, in a translated volume about proto-Semitic burial cults in Canaan. Tribes that worshipped silence, darkness, the absence of God. Daniel felt something heavy shift inside his chest. She continued, the Latin around the edge. It's a corruption. But the phrase reads something close to, the silence is watching. The seal must not break. Daniel stared at her. And the shape, she added, geometrically precise. Too precise. That's often a sign of something intentionally esoteric, meant to ward off or contain. Contain what? He asked. She looked at him, her eyes unblinking. I don't know, but you don't wear something like this. You bury it. Daniel sat back in his chair, Everything inside him screamed that they'd opened something that was never meant to be touched. Harriet placed the bag on the table, then hesitated. "There's something else. I shouldn't even mention it. But if this is real—" She pulled open a bottom drawer and removed a thin, weathered manuscript. She flipped through until she landed on a sketch, charcoal on parchment. Faded, but still visible. Daniel leaned forward. There it was, the same symbol, centered on what looked like an altar, surrounded by figures kneeling, head bowed, hands over ears. "The cult of the unheard," Harriet whispered. They believed silence itself was sacred, that something ancient lived in stillness, and that sound, even prayer, could wake it. Daniel's blood chilled. "Where did you get this?" Harriet shook her head. "No idea. It was donated years ago. No record of origin. I always thought it was apocryphal nonsense." She looked at him again, expression shifting to something like fear. "But you found that ring in Wyoming, didn't you?" Daniel didn't speak. Harriet nodded slowly. "Then it's not nonsense." They sat in silence for a long moment. The only sound was the hum of the lamp. Daniel finally stood. "Thank you. I need to go." Harriet grabbed his wrist before he could leave. "Be careful, Daniel. If that ring is a seal, someone buried it for a reason." He nodded once, then stepped out into the hallway. The air outside had shifted. The wind had picked up, carrying with it a strange electric tension, as if something unseen was pressing against the edges of the town. Watching. Waiting. As Daniel walked back to his car, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, stood a man, tall, thin, gray coat. He was watching him. But when Daniel crossed the street to confront him, he was gone. The motel was silent when Daniel arrived just after sunset. He always chose the same one when he returned to Laramie. Not because it was comfortable, but because it hadn't changed. The same peeling blue shutters, the same buzzing neon vacancy sign, the same rusted ice machine that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. Inside, the air was still, dim, smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. He dropped his coat onto the chair and placed the ring, still sealed in its evidence pouch, on the nightstand. It seemed to radiate a quiet pressure, like it was listening. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Not yet. He opened his old leather notebook, the same one he'd used back in '84. Pages yellowed, corners bent, spines broken. He flipped through faded sketches, witness interviews, notes from a much younger man trying to make sense of an impossible crime. Then he found her name. Alice Withrow. The whispers had always been the same, that she and Father Alden were more than friends, that her disappearance wasn't unrelated, that the church knew more than it ever let on. Daniel hadn't found much on Alice back then. Her personnel file was slim, no family. A birth record in Oregon. One arrest in college, civil disobedience during a sit-in. After that, she vanished into the folds of parish life. But what stuck with him most wasn't a fact. It was something she said to him once when he came to question her the week after the disappearance. Some walls weren't made to echo, detective. Some were made to contain. He hadn't known what to make of it then. Now, after Harriet's warnings, it echoed differently. His phone vibrated. "Unknown caller." He answered. Silence. "Hello?" he said. Still nothing. But then, faintly, he heard it. A knock. 1, 2, 3. Slow, measured, hollow. He stiffened. The sound didn't come through the phone. It was inside the room. He turned slowly. The closet door closed when he entered. Now, slightly, ajar. He crossed the room cautiously. Reached out, pulled it open. Empty. Just hangers. Dust, a cracked mirror, and written across the glass, as if traced by a fingertip. Be still. His breath caught. He stepped back, heart racing. And then, another knock, but this time from the floor. Underneath the motel room, 3 knocks. Again. Daniel dropped to his knees, pressed his ear to the worn carpet. Nothing. Just silence. Until a whisper. Faint. Barely there. Not a word. Not a phrase. Just breath. He stood quickly, blood pounding in his ears. This was no prank, no creaky pipes. Someone, something, was reaching out. He grabbed the ring, shoved it back into his coat pocket, and left the room. The parking lot was empty, the night air sharp and still. But across the street, beneath the sodium glow of a flickering streetlight, he saw it again. The man. Same gray coat, same posture, watching him. Daniel walked toward him. This time the figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe. When Daniel reached the sidewalk, just steps away, the figure turned and slowly walked into the alley behind the pharmacy. Daniel followed, boots crunching gravel. The alley was narrow, choked with garbage bins, shadowed by overgrown trees, and empty. No one there, except a small envelope, placed carefully atop a trash can lid. Daniel picked it up. Inside, a Polaroid. It showed the interior of St. Agnes Church. A man, blurry, thin, mouth open mid-scream, was kneeling in front of the altar. Blood poured from his ears. Scrawled across the photo in red ink, "Open the floor and you open the door." Daniel stared into the shadows, but they didn't stare back. They listened. At dawn, Daniel stood once more inside St. Agnes Church. The air was heavier now, not just with dust and age, but with something else. A pressure, like the walls had inhaled, and were waiting to exhale. He moved carefully down the central aisle, boots echoing off stone. The crime scene had been cleared, the evidence removed, but the altar remained untouched, looming, watching. He approached the dais slowly, eyes scanning every inch. He hadn't been here since the first excavation, but the photograph, left in the alley, still burned in his mind. A man kneeling, blood from his ears. The altar behind him. Open the floor. Open the door. Daniel's gaze dropped to the wooden panels beneath the altar. He knelt, pressed his palm flat. Cool, solid, unremarkable. But then, he heard it. A faint, hollow reverberation when he shifted his weight. He knocked once. The sound was too light. Something was beneath it. He stood quickly, surveyed the room. At the rear of the church, a janitor's closet remained ajar. Inside he found old tools, rusted crowbar, chisel, work gloves. Minutes later, he returned to the altar and began to pry. The first panel creaked, the second split clean down the center. With each removed board, the air grew colder. Until finally, a square of stone, rough, gray, etched faintly with symbols matching the ring. He paused, then placed the ring on the center carving. It clicked, a breathless, silent click. The stone shifted, sank, and then, without warning, slid aside, revealing a narrow shaft beneath the altar. Dark, descending. The smell that rose up was ancient. Damp stone, decaying paper, the faintest trace of iron. Daniel took a flashlight and descended. The steps were stone, uneven, slick with condensation. 20 steps down, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. At the bottom, he found a chamber. Circular, no bigger than a small chapel. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with books, jars, bones. And in the center, a single wooden chair. Strapped to it with iron bindings, long rusted, was a human skeleton. Small, fragile, a child. Daniel's knees gave slightly. A girl's shoe rested at the base of the chair. One he recognized instantly. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling. Rose Alden. Her remains had been hidden directly beneath the altar all these years. But something wasn't right. There were no signs of trauma, no rope burns, no broken bones, no signs of restraint, except the bindings. He looked at the walls. Latin inscriptions ran along the top in a careful hand. He translated slowly. She speaks to silence. She carries the voice. She must not wake. Daniel's breath caught. This wasn't a killing. This was a ritual, a containment. He looked back at the remains. The child hadn't been buried. She'd been sealed. The realization hit him like a wave of ice. They hadn't just hidden the body, they had sacrificed her to silence something or someone. Suddenly the light from his flashlight flickered. He hit it. The beam steadied. Then, a sound from behind him. 3 knocks, deliberate, slow. Not from the stairs, from inside the wall. Daniel stood, every hair on his body rising. He turned slowly. In the far corner, another panel of stone. Smaller, fitted with iron hinges. Another door. He approached cautiously. No lock, just a handle. He hesitated, then opened it. Darkness, a corridor. And at the end, just barely visible in the flickering light, another chair. This one empty, waiting. Daniel stepped into the corridor. Each footfall echoed like a whisper off the stone. Soft, distant, and somehow mirrored, as if the walls themselves were walking with him. The empty chair at the end seemed to lean slightly forward, like it had been waiting for someone to return. He passed alcoves carved into the stone, small recesses that once might have held candles or relics. But now they held something else. He stopped at the first alcove. Inside, a bundle of yellowed paper, bound with red thread. He reached out and picked it up carefully. The pages were brittle. On the first sheet, a symbol matching the ring. On the second, hand-drawn diagrams. Not just religious, architectural. Designs for chambers, circles, seals. Names written in Latin, and scratched out violently. He flipped to the last page. One phrase, repeated 3 times. She did not sleep. He tucked the bundle under his coat. At the next alcove, a sealed glass jar. Inside, a braid of hair, perfectly preserved, floating in amber liquid. Another held a rosary, each bead carved with tiny faces, all screaming silently. Daniel's stomach churned. This wasn't a crypt, it was a vault. A place built not to remember the dead, but to keep something locked beneath them. He reached the final alcove. An iron plaque mounted above it read, Sacrificium Secunda, second sacrifice. The implication struck him like a blow. Rose Alden was the first. This room, this chair, waited for the second. He looked around the chamber, and then finally up. A shaft, narrow, vertical, rose above the empty chair. Faint light filtered down through dust. Far above, directly beneath the old rectory, the geometry was precise. Daniel's thoughts raced. He exited slowly, climbing back up through the hidden stair. When he emerged into the sanctuary, the light had changed. Morning had broken fully. The glass windows poured gold and crimson across the floor. He staggered to the pews, breathing heavily. And for the first time in years, he prayed. Not for clarity, not for justice, but for time. Because whatever had been kept quiet beneath St. Agnes for decades was beginning to stir. The town of Laramie hadn't changed much since the 80s. Same brick storefronts, same cracked sidewalks, same uneasy quiet after sundown. But as Daniel drove toward the parish archives, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. A black van parked across from the church, windows tinted, engine cold, unmarked. It hadn't moved all morning. He noted the plates, then kept driving. The parish archives were located in the back wing of the diocesan offices, a building adjacent to the newer part of St. Agnes. A more modern addition, built in the early 90s, supposedly to bring the church into the future. But the future hadn't come. The office door creaked as Daniel pushed it open. Inside, rows of cabinets, shelves of brittle file boxes, and the scent of old ink and mildew. At the center desk sat a young archivist with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous energy. "Detective Sloane?" she said, standing quickly. "I wasn't expecting—" I called ahead. Daniel interrupted gently. "I need everything you have on St. Agnes. Architectural plans, maintenance logs, and especially anything filed by Father Alden between April and September of 1984. She nodded, already moving toward the back shelves. "It's a lot, but you're welcome to go through it." He worked for hours. Dust settled on his sleeves as he opened box after box. Pages yellowed with age, scrawled in cursive, some brittle enough to tear just from turning them. Invoices, repair slips, letters from parishioners. Then, something strange. A document misfiled in a utilities folder. It was handwritten, torn from a journal. Dated August 19, 1984, he read, "The child speaks of the man with no mouth. Says he stands in the mirror at dusk. She says he hums without breathing. That he follows her into dreams. Alice is terrified. I should have never brought the seal above ground. The symbol was not meant to be exposed." Daniel blinked. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Father Alden." He flipped the page. "I fear the altar no longer holds. The stone softens. The breath comes through. Something must be done. If I vanish, may this record remain. Let it be known. I tried." Daniel sat back, heart thundering. So it was true. The priest had discovered something ancient, something beneath, and he had tried to stop it, but no one listened. Another folder caught his eye. Thinner, labeled with a single word in red ink, "Withrow." Inside, just one document. A letter, unsent, never folded, addressed "To whom it may concern." If you're reading this, it means the ground has opened. I warned them. I begged Thomas not to build above it. The circle was meant to be undisturbed. We tried to seal it again after the girl, but the second seal was never completed. They stopped us, called us mad, said we were a danger. But I've seen what it does, what it becomes. Daniel read on. He wears different faces, but the eyes stay the same. If he comes to you, do not answer. Do not listen. He lives in the silence between. At the bottom, a drawing, that same impossible symbol, but this time split in half like it had been torn open. Daniel closed the folder, breath shallow. He reached for his phone to photograph the pages, and stopped. The room had gone quiet, utterly. Silent. Not just muffled. Dead. The hum of the lights had stopped. The fan on the computer, even the faint sound of wind against the window. Gone. As if the world itself had paused. He turned slowly, and saw the man. Standing at the far end of the archive hall. Same gray coat, same stillness, but now closer. Daniel's mouth went dry. He stepped toward the hallway. But the man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't exist the way people should. Daniel turned, walked, then jogged toward the exit, burst out into the parking lot, and the sounds came rushing back: wind, engines, birds, life. But when he looked back toward the glass doors, there was no one inside. No man in gray, just his reflection. And for a second, it wasn't his face staring back. Daniel stood frozen on the asphalt, heart pounding in his chest. He blinked hard, wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his coat, and looked again. His reflection had returned to normal. His face, his eyes. But something still lingered beneath the surface. like a fogged memory that hadn't yet settled. He backed away from the door slowly. Across the street, the black van remained parked. He reached into his coat, took out his phone, and snapped a photo of the plates. Then, without hesitation, he dialed the only number he still trusted inside the Laramie Police Department. "Reyes," came the voice on the other end. "Rough alert." "Tom," Daniel said, "I need a favor. Quietly." "You all right? You sound—" "There's a van parked across from St. Agnes. I need a plate run. No report filed, no dispatch alert, just background. Discreet." There was a pause. "I can do that. You at the scene?" "No," Daniel replied, "and I'm not going back there tonight." He hung up, started walking. As he passed the side of the church, he noticed something new. Faint markings scratched into the brick wall. A circle, a vertical line. Then 3 short strokes beside it. Child's drawing almost, but it wasn't. It matched the diagram from the journal page, the one describing a failed second seal. Daniel leaned closer. At the base of the symbol, fresh wax, dripped into the groove like a sealant. Still warm. Someone had been here. Recently. He scanned the sidewalk. No footprints. No cigarette butts. No signs of a lingering presence. Except for a faint hum in the back of his skull. He stepped back, the light flickered above the church door. He glanced once more at the symbol, and noticed something he'd missed. A small strip of torn paper had been wedged between the bricks. He pried it free, unfolding it gently. One sentence, in a child's shaky hand. "He lives in the quiet part of you." Daniel didn't sleep that night. He didn't go home. He drove, for hours, until the plains gave way to hills, and the hills to forest, and the forest to the long dirt road that led to the place he swore he'd never return. The Withrow property, Alice's. Family land. Abandoned since 1985, the house still stood, leaning, brittle, overtaken by weeds and silence. But Daniel had seen it. The gate to the Withrow property creaked open with a rusted groan, protesting the return of footsteps it hadn't heard in nearly 3 decades. Daniel's flashlight cut a thin line through the dense dark. The trees here leaned unnaturally inward, their branches twisted like fingers trying to keep something in rather than out. The moon was high, but its light barely touched the ground. He moved slowly down the gravel path, the crunch beneath his boots absorbed by the thick air. The house. Rose ahead, 2 stories of rotted wood and silence. Every window was black. He stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under his weight. The door wasn't locked. It never had been. He pushed it open. Inside, the smell hit him first. Moisture. Decay. And underneath it all, something sour. Chemical. He passed through the front hallway, once filled with religious paintings and dried flowers, now stripped bare. But the furniture remained. Frozen in time. A teacup on the mantel. A child's shoe under the radiator. Alice had lived here long after the disappearances. Her retreat had been intentional. Secretive. But now Daniel knew why. She hadn't been hiding from people. She'd been guarding the door. He found the basement entrance in the kitchen, same spot he remembered. The door groaned open, and immediately he felt it. Not just cold, pressure. Like the house itself exhaled downward. He descended slowly, flashlight flickering over old shelving, boxes, broken jars. Cobwebs clung to his coat. The basement was larger than it should have been. The back wall had been altered. Stone, hand chiseled, and at its center, a circular iron plate bolted into the foundation. The second seal. He approached cautiously. The ring, still, in his coat, grew warm against his chest. Daniel knelt beside the seal. The iron was etched with the same sigil he'd seen in the chamber beneath St. Agnes. But this one was intact, sealed, protected. He reached into his coat and removed the ring. As he held it up, the symbols on the seal seemed to shimmer faintly. Then, the floor beneath him vibrated. Just once, a long, low thrum. He stood quickly. Something was moving beneath, shifting, awake. Suddenly the flashlight died. Total blackness. Daniel froze, his breath loud in his own ears. Then, the sound. Not a growl, not a voice. Something between a hiss and a whisper, but made of breath that didn't come from lungs. A shape moved at the edge of his perception. Then another. Shadows crawling inside shadows. Daniel reached for his backup, flashlight, but it was gone. He turned, and a figure stood in the doorway at the top of the basement stairs, backlit by moonlight, watching. No eyes, no mouth, but Daniel knew. It was the same figure from the glass, the man in gray. Except now, he wasn't still. He was smiling. Somehow, not with lips, but with the shape of his presence. Daniel backed away, and the seal pulsed beneath him, a low hum, growing louder, higher, until suddenly, the entire house shook, wood cracked, glass shattered. A scream rose up, not from outside, from underneath. Something pounded against the iron plate. Once, twice, Daniel stumbled back, his boot catching a root of stone. He hit the ground hard. Above him, the man in gray turned and walked away, vanishing into the dark hall. The shaking stopped, the pounding ceased, only the seal remained, unbroken, for now. Daniel lay there, heart racing, breath shallow, and realized someone had just tested the door and someone else had let it know it wasn't alone. He forced himself up slowly. His knees ached. His shoulder throbbed from the fall. But the silence was back, the real kind. No whisper, no vibration, no figure at the top of the stairs. He staggered toward the seal once more. The heat was gone. The air had cooled, but not completely. The iron plate retained a faint warmth, as if it had absorbed something, or fed on it. He stared at it for a long moment, his thoughts tangled. Someone, or something, was trying to breach the seal. Not just from below, from above too. And the man in gray. He wasn't a man at all. Not in the usual sense. He was part of the system, like a mechanism of the silence, a gatekeeper, or a sentinel. Daniel opened his notebook with trembling hands and began to sketch the room, the location of the plate, the positioning of the chiseled walls. He measured roughly with his boot length, estimated angles, heights, direction. This chamber had been placed deliberately. The altar in St. Agnes, the chair in the subchamber, and this seal, they formed a triangle, a geographic construct. But why? He dug deeper in his bag, pulling out the last item he hadn't dared touch since finding it. Alice Withrow's journal. Recovered, years ago from her locked dresser after she disappeared. Never published. Never investigated properly. He had kept it, and now he opened it. The first entries were benign. Church routines, music practice, notes on parishioners. But then, 3 pages in, she's humming again, even in her sleep. I asked Thomas if he heard it, and he just stared at me. Said I needed rest, but I know what I hear. The mirror in the choir loft cracked today. No reason, no wind, just shattered. I think she saw something in it before it broke. Daniel turned the page. More frantic now. The geometry was wrong. The old plans from the architect. St. Agnes was supposed to face due east, but it doesn't. It was rotated, on purpose. The altar aligns with the old riverbed. A fault line, or a vein. He told me the Latin word he found carved under the original cornerstone, vocatio. It means calling, or summoning. I don't think the church was built to keep God in. I think it was built to keep something else quiet. Daniel's hands were sweating. He turned to the final entry. She told me her dreams are full of hands, too many fingers, eyes where there should be mouths. She said, "He wears the voice of my father, but it's not him." I asked who he is. She said, "The one in the silence. He wants to come upstairs now." Daniel closed the book. A chill passed through him like a wind that didn't move the air. He looked one last time at the iron plate and whispered aloud, just once, "Who did we build this town for?" Then he climbed the stairs and didn't look back. Daniel didn't drive back to town immediately. He needed distance from the house, from the seal, from the pressure building in the air like a low, humming storm. He parked along the ridge that overlooked Laramie. The town stretched beneath him. Familiar streets, warm porch lights, quiet intersections. It looked peaceful from above. Normal. But he knew better now. The peace was a surface tension. Beneath it, something ancient was shifting. He pulled out his notebook and traced the map he'd formed in his head. St. Agnes Church, the Withrow House, and the old convent. Each site forming a triangle, one whose purpose was no longer symbolic, but structural. These weren't just places. They were anchors. He circled each point, then drew a fourth, centered between them, a location not yet visited, one the others might have been built around, an origin. As he calculated coordinates, his phone buzzed. A message from Tom Reyes. Van registered to a decommissioned freight company out of Montana. No known owners, no active plates. Nothing in the system. Daniel stared at the message. They were being watched by something, or someone, who didn't exist on paper. A knock at his car window startled him. He flinched, reaching for the weapon he no longer carried, but relaxed when he saw her. Megan Cruz. She looked pale, tired. Same as him. He rolled down the window. "You shouldn't be out here." She ignored that. "We just finished the lab analysis." He opened the door and stepped out. The wind on the ridge was sharp, whispering across the grass like hushed voices. Megan pulled a small envelope from her coat and handed it to him. Inside, photos. The child's remains from the sealed chamber. The DNA results. Matches confirmed. Rose Alden? Daniel swallowed. She continued. "But it's not just that. We found something embedded in one of her molars." He looked up sharply. "What kind of something?" "A sliver of metal. Very fine, almost surgical. It had etchings on it, microscopic but deliberate. When we enlarged it," she handed him another photo. "It showed the same symbol as the ring, only inverted, almost like a key." Daniel felt dizzy. Who the hell puts that in a child? Megan didn't answer. He stared out at the town again. "You ever feel like we're not investigating a crime?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" He turned to her, voice low. "I think we're excavating a plan. One that started before any of us were born. Before this town even had a name." Megan hesitated. "Daniel, the basement where we found her? The walls were layered. There were layers beneath the foundation stone, like something had been buried before the church was even designed." He nodded. "I think the Aldens were the final part of a ritual." She looked at him, horrified. "You think they offered her?" "No," he said quietly. "I think they tried to stop it. And when they failed, they gave themselves to it. To keep it sealed." A long silence followed. Then she said, "What now?" He showed her the map in his notebook, pointed to the center. "There's one place left. The land records say it was owned by the diocese until 1948, then sold to a private holding. Nothing's been built on it since. No access roads, just fenced field." "What's there?" Daniel looked up at her. "I don't know, but if the church is one lock, and Withrow's house is another, then that place might be the hinge." They drove together, headlights cutting through the dark countryside. As they approached the land, the GPS lost signal. No cell tower. No reception. The field emerged slowly through the fog. a flat stretch of earth surrounded by chain link, twisted and broken in places. The gate hung open. "Subtle," Megan muttered. They passed through. No signs, no paths. But in the center something caught the light. A mound. No more than 4 feet tall. They walked toward it slowly, the air growing colder with each step. When they reached it, Daniel knelt. Grass had grown around it unnaturally. A perfect ring. He brushed away the soil. A square of iron met his fingers, carved into its center, vocatio. Same word from Father Alden's journal. This wasn't a burial site, it was a summoning point. Daniel stood slowly. "Help me," he said. Together, they pried the cover loose. And beneath it, not a pit, not a stair, just a black void. A space that didn't seem to end. From its depth, a breath rose, not wind, a breath, and faintly. The sound of a child's voice, singing, but not in English, not in any language Daniel had ever heard. Megan backed away. "Daniel, we shouldn't be here," he agreed, but it was too late. From the shadows below, something opened its eyes. They ran, not because they were chased, but because something had noticed them. Daniel and Megan reached the fence line without speaking, their breath ragged, their limbs stiff from the cold and something deeper, primal, as if the void had pulled at the sinew beneath their skin, testing the strength of their will. Daniel fumbled with the keys, slammed the car into gear as they drove. He didn't look in the mirror, didn't want to see if the dark had followed. It wasn't until they reached the edge of town that either of them spoke. "What the hell was that?" Megan whispered. Daniel didn't answer right away. He turned the car toward his motel, parked, and killed the engine. Inside the room, he retrieved the journal, the photos, and the ring. He spread them out across the bed like puzzle pieces. "I think it was the origin," he said finally. "The point where whatever this is first made contact." "Contact with who?" "With whoever listened." Megan sat across from him. Her face was pale, her lips bloodless. Daniel continued. "I believe St. Agnes, the Withrow property, and that mound weren't chosen randomly. They were built in a pattern, a system of containment." "Like a cage," Megan murmured. He nodded. "But only effective if the hinges stay sealed. And now one's open." Daniel pulled out the Polaroid left in the alley, the screaming man in front of the altar. Then the torn journal entry from Alice Withrow, the phrase written in a child's hand, "He lives in the quiet part of you." They weren't metaphors, he said. They were warnings. Megan stood, began to pace. "Why here? Why this town?" Daniel hesitated, then said, "Because Laramie wasn't founded on faith. It was founded on silence." He opened a manila folder he hadn't touched in years. It held original town maps, old territorial records, forgotten census entries. He pointed to a single sheet. Before it was called Laramie, this land belonged to a defunct mining colony. The town dissolved in 1843. The remaining settlers vanished. Megan's eyes widened. "Disappeared?" He nodded. "No records of a mass exodus, no graves. Just gone." He flipped another page, revealing a newspaper clipping from 1891. "Church construction delayed due to unstable ground. Workers report voices from beneath foundation." Megan read the headline in silence. Daniel added, "The article was buried, never followed up, but it's the same ground St. Agnes was built on." "So the church wasn't an act of faith," she said slowly. "It was damage control." He nodded. "The diocese knew, maybe not the full extent, but enough to build. Over it?" Megan sat heavily. Daniel looked at her. "I think Rose Alden was sensitive to whatever it is. That's why she heard the voices, why she drew the symbols, why Father Alden tried to seal her. But why her?" Megan whispered. "Why children?" Daniel picked up a file from the corner of the bed. "Because it's happened before." He opened it. revealing old case reports, yellowed photographs. Every 27 years, like clockwork, a child vanishes under strange circumstances. One in 57, one in 84, one in 2011. Megan stared. That's this year. Daniel nodded. We're weeks away from the end of the cycle. She looked up slowly. Which means someone else is next. He said nothing, because he already knew. And he knew who. He opened a file labeled Case Jabro 84 Rose Alden. Inside was a sketch, drawn by Rose Alden a week before her disappearance. It showed 3 figures standing under a black sun. One was small, one was tall. The third had no face. And beside them she'd drawn a house, not the rectory, not the church, but a simple, square building with a tree in front of it. Daniel reached into the pile and retrieved a recent photo. It matched exactly. He turned to Megan. Do you know who lives here now? She stared at the image. Then her eyes filled with dread. My niece. Daniel's voice was low. How old is she? 7. Silence fell between them like a sheet of ice. He stood. We need to get to her. Tonight. Megan grabbed her coat. Her name's Lydia. She started humming in her sleep last week. Daniel's breath caught. They moved quickly. The drive took less than 15 minutes, but the roads felt longer, the air heavier. When they arrived, Megan ran to the door. Lights were off. She knocked, no answer. Daniel peered through the front window. The living room was dark, and then a soft knock from inside the house. Lydia stood on the stairs, in her pajamas, eyes unfocused, head tilted and humming. But it wasn't a melody. It was a frequency. Daniel felt it in his teeth, low, vibrating. She raised her hand slowly and pointed to the closet at the end of the hallway and whispered a single word. He's listening. Daniel moved first. He stepped past Megan, careful not to startle Lydia, and approached the closet. The hallway was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a lamb. Megan knelt beside her niece, gently brushing the girl's hair back. Lydia, sweetheart, who are you talking about? The child didn't answer. She kept humming, eyes glassy, still pointing. Daniel reached the closet door. His hand hovered over the knob. He remembered the last time he heard this hum. In the Withrow basement, from beneath the seal. He turned the handle, opened it. Inside, coats, boots, a box of toys. Normal, too normal. But the back panel of the closet, a thin wooden wall, had been moved slightly, pushed inward, like a hidden door. He crouched, shined his flashlight. There was a gap, a hollow space between the closet and the insulation. He reached in, pulled something out, a notebook, child's size. He opened it slowly. Page after page was filled, with spirals. Tight, concentric, obsessive, and words written over and over. He speaks without sound. He sees through closed eyes. He waits behind the door. Daniel's skin crawled. He flipped to the last page. There, Lydia had drawn something, a circle, again, with 3 figures, one small, one tall, and one that had no face. But this time, the faceless figure held something in its hand, the gold ring. Daniel staggered back. Megan looked up. What is it? He showed her the drawing. She stared, pale. She's never seen that ring, she said. I never showed her. How would she? She wouldn't, Daniel said. He turned to Lydia. When did you start seeing him? The girl tilted her head. After the whisper. Megan swallowed. What whisper? Lydia blinked slowly. It came from under my bed. The silence that followed was brutal. Daniel knelt in front of her. What did it say? Lydia looked at him almost apologetically. It said, Come downstairs. Daniel stood quickly. "We have to go," he said. "Right now!" Megan gathered Lydia in her arms, but before they reached the door, the lights went out. Not flickered, died. Complete blackness fell over the house like a curtain. Daniel yanked out his flashlight, but the beam struggled, stuttering, like it had in the Withrow basement. Then, footsteps. Not heavy, not rushed, measured, from upstairs. Daniel aimed his light at the staircase. Nothing. He whispered, "Megan, go. Take her. Now." She nodded, clutching Lydia tightly, moving toward the back door. Daniel remained, listening. The footsteps continued, slow, rhythmic, descending the stairs that moments ago had been empty. And then, he saw it, just the edge of a shadow, the shape of a leg. A coat, gray. It turned the corner, and the man appeared. Still, calm, but his face was wrong. It had features, but they kept changing. Mouth too wide, eyes too many, then none at all. Daniel raised the flashlight. The man didn't flinch. Daniel spoke. "What are you?" The voice that came in return wasn't sound. It was inside his skull. "I am the part you silence. The thought you never say aloud. The scream that gets swallowed." Daniel's knees buckled. The flashlight hit the floor. Everything around him dimmed. Not just light, meaning. The walls stretched, the air folded inward, and suddenly Daniel wasn't in a hallway anymore. He was in the chamber. The first one. With the chair, and Rose's remains. But now the chair was empty. Waiting again. He heard breathing behind him, turned, and saw Rose, alive. 7 years old, eyes wide. "Don't let it upstairs," she said. Then, the world snapped back. Daniel was on the floor, gasping. The man in gray was gone. The door to the backyard stood open. He staggered outside. Megan and Lydia were by the car. Safe, shaken. "We need to end this," he said, voice hoarse. "How?" Megan asked. Daniel looked at the girl. Lydia had stopped humming. She looked calmer now, more present. She whispered, "The seal isn't shut." Daniel turned to Megan. "I know where the final piece is." Daniel looked down at Lydia. Her voice was steady now. The trance had lifted, but the memory hadn't. She took Megan's hand. "I don't want to sleep in this house anymore." "You won't," Megan said softly. "We're leaving." Daniel stepped closer. "Lydia, can you tell me something?" The girl nodded. "When you heard the whisper, did it tell you where to go?" She hesitated, then pointed up, to the attic. Daniel and Megan exchanged glances. Minutes later, they stood in the narrow hallway outside Lydia's bedroom. Daniel pulled the cord hanging from the ceiling hatch. The wooden stairs creaked as they unfolded. He climbed first. The attic smelled like dust and insulation. Boxes lined the edges, Christmas decorations, old baby clothes, school books, and something else. A space cleared near the center. A rug had been pulled aside. The wood beneath was different, rougher, older, not part of the house's design. Daniel knelt, ran, his fingers along the seams, then lifted. It opened, a shallow recess beneath the floorboards. Inside it, a cloth bundle, wrapped in twine. He opened it slowly. Inside were 5 objects: a small doll, with its mouth sewn shut, a rosary identical to the one from the church basement, a brass key with no teeth, a strip of parchment, brittle and crumbling, and at the center, a second ring identical to the one Daniel had found beneath St. Agnes, but darker, tarnished. He turned it over. Same inscription, same weight, another seal. He stood slowly. "They planted this here," he said, "to suppress it. A secondary node, a personal one." "You think Alice put it here?" Megan asked. "Maybe. or someone she trusted. He wrapped the bundle again, turned to leave, and heard the creak. Not from the stairs, from behind him. He turned. In the far corner of the attic, a mirror stood propped against the insulation, covered in a white sheet. He hadn't seen it before. He approached. Each step made the floor whine. He reached for the cloth, pulled it back. The mirror reflected the room. But not Daniel. He wasn't in it. Instead, it showed the basement of St. Agnes. The chamber, the chair, the child. Then the surface of the mirror shifted, like water, and something inside looked back. Its eyes were hollow, not empty, but hollow, as if carved from silence itself. Daniel stepped back, heart hammering. He covered the mirror again, threw a sheet over the recess, and descended. "We're done here," he said to Megan. Back at the car, Lydia was already asleep in the back seat, as if her body had known the danger had passed, but Daniel knew better. It hadn't passed. It was waiting. In patterns, in architecture, in silence. "We need to take both rings to the final location," he said. "And close the seal." Megan looked at him. "Can we?" Daniel looked down at the bundle in his hands and whispered, "We don't have a choice." They drove in silence. The rings, both of them, rested between Daniel and Megan, wrapped in cloth, sealed in a small steel box. Daniel had brought years ago for evidence too dangerous to leave unprotected. Lydia slept in the back seat, her breath steady. Her small hand clutched the stuffed animal Megan had grabbed from her bed. The town lights faded behind them. Ahead, the horizon returned to black. The road to the final site wasn't on any GPS. Daniel followed the same hand-drawn map he had traced. The night before, calculating the geometric center between the triangle's 3 points, church, house, mound. Their destination was marked only by silence. No signs, no power lines, no fences, just grassland and stillness. When they arrived, the air had shifted again. It was heavier now, not from storm clouds, from presence. They parked beside a fallen tree. Beyond it, the earth sloped downward into a shallow depression. Wild grasses had overgrown most of it, but Daniel could see it. The subtle dip in the landscape, a shape too intentional to be natural. He turned to Megan. "This is where it ends." She nodded. "Tell me what we do." Daniel knelt, unwrapped the rings. He handed one to her. "They need to be placed at opposite points. The symbols aligned. If the triangle was a cage, then this is the lock. And these are the keys." She took the ring carefully, her breath catching. He handed her a flashlight. They split up, circling the edge of the depression. Daniel found his point, a carved stone just beneath the soil, exposed like a tooth. He placed the ring inside the shallow indentation. It clicked, quietly. Megan reached hers moments later. Her voice came soft over the dark. "Ready." "Now." They turned the rings simultaneously, and the ground responded. First, a tremble, then a pulse. The earth beneath them sighed. A seam split through the center of the field like something exhaling, beneath centuries of restraint, and then a circular slab rose from the center of the depression. Not fast, not violent, deliberate. Beneath it, the same symbol. Complete now. Closed. Daniel approached it slowly. At its center, a hollow, empty, waiting for the final seal. He placed the steel box into the cavity. Opened it, both rings gleamed faintly in the moonlight. He whispered a short prayer. Not because he believed it would work, but because silence now felt like permission. He turned the final mechanism, and the seal closed. The moment it did, the wind stopped, the air shifted again, and Daniel felt it, like something immense had been pulled backward, yanked away from the surface, sealed not with force, but with memory. He fell to his knees. Megan ran to him. "Are you all right?" He nodded slowly. "It's done." But then, from behind them, a laugh, dry, raspy. They turned, and the man in gray stood at the ridge, still, perfect, but not calm anymore. He was shaking, not from rage, from disintegration. His form was coming undone, like dust unraveling. He opened his mouth, and what came out wasn't a sound. It was silence. Pure, and it struck like a blade. Daniel doubled over. Megan shielded Lydia. The man stepped forward once, then paused, stared at Daniel, and mouthed two words. "Not yet," then vanished. Not in a flash, not in smoke, just absence. Gone. The wind returned. The trees shifted. The grass swayed again, and the world felt quiet, in a way it hadn't in years. Daniel stood, his chest hurt. His hands shook, but the pressure was gone. The weight beneath the earth, the tension in the walls of every sacred building in Laramie, had receded. Megan looked at him. "Did we stop it?" He looked out across the dark field. "I think we bought time." She nodded. That would have to be enough. They turned to Lydia. She was smiling, small, soft. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the notebook Daniel had recovered. "I want you to have it," she said. He knelt. "Why?" "Because you remember things," she said. "Even the scary parts." He took the notebook, held her hand for a moment, and whispered, "You're safe now." They walked back to the car in silence. This time, silence didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. The following week passed in a strange rhythm. The police never came to investigate the field outside of town. The diocese made no comment about the altar at St. Agnes being reopened, and the man in gray, if he had ever been a man, never returned. But Daniel knew what had been sealed wasn't just a place. It was a cycle, and cycles always try to begin again. He spent his last days in Laramie in silence, closed case files, returned documents, handed everything over to Megan, Alice Withro's journal. The second ring now fused into the central seal, and Rose's drawings. She would become the new guardian, because someone always had to remember. On the morning of his departure, he returned to the church one final time. St. Agnes was empty. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting golden shapes across the altar stones. He approached slowly. The wood had been restored, the floor resealed, but in the corner of the altar, nestled between old cracks, something new had been left. Behind, a small origami bird. Child's paper, folded carefully. Daniel picked it up. Inside, written in crayon, was a single sentence. "Thank you for quieting the noise." There was no signature. But he recognized the handwriting. Lydia. He smiled, for the first time in days. The pain was still there. So was the guilt, for what he hadn't been able to stop. But now, there was space to breathe. At the foot of the altar steps he knelt, not to pray, but to remember. Rose, Thomas, Alice. All the ones who had tried to keep the silence contained, even when the world refused to listen. At the airport, the world felt too ordinary. People in a hurry, children crying, cracked loudspeakers making bland announcements. Daniel walked to his gate with a strange sense of dislocation, as if reality hadn't quite caught up. On the seat beside him, a woman read a newspaper. Nothing on the front page about Laramie. Nothing about the bodies beneath the church. Nothing about the child who had almost been taken. But on the culture page, a small headline caught his eye. Medieval Religious Art Exhibit reveals uncatalogued symbols. He looked at the photo. A stained glass window, a circular symbol, almost identical to the one sealed in the field. The cycle continued, just in new places. Daniel closed his eyes, folded the paper, and boarded the flight. Months later, in a small town, 1,000 miles away, An 8-year-old girl woke from a strange dream. She said a man in gray smiled at her through the mirror, that he had no eyes, but he knew her name, and he sang without opening his mouth. Her mother laughed, said it was just a nightmare. But the next morning, the girl drew a symbol and placed it beneath her pillow, hoping someone would know what it meant. Daniel now lived in a place with more sky than buildings. He wrote sometimes, just for himself, without a name. He kept everything in a wooden box beneath the bed. But one stormy night he heard something that made him stop cold. Not a whisper, not a groan. 3 knocks, slow, from deep within the wall. He stood still, listening, then smiled sadly and said softly, "Not this time." He got up and began to write again.